You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
We've seen him recover the Ark of the Covenant from the grasp of the evil Nazis, restore the magical Sankara stones back to their rightful place, and go on a quest to find the Holy Grail with his father. And that is not to mention all the stuff with the aliens with the crystal skulls. But intrepid archaeologist Dr. Indiana Jones is back for one last time, for one last adventure, to retrieve a legendary dial that can change the course of history. Welcome to a special episode of Making Tracks Reaction Chat, brought to you by those very nice lads and lasses from fanfortracks.com. We're taking a break from a galaxy far, far away for this trip back in time and have a chat about our thoughts and the good and the bad bits that make up Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Over the course of the last 40 years, the adventures of Indiana Jones has taken the cinema-going audience on countless memorable and wild rides, and the makers of the Dial of Destiny claim this will do the same. Not to take anyone's word for it, my good co-host Mark Newbold and myself have set out on our own noble quest to discover the truth about the Dial of Destiny for ourselves. So the big question I should start with, Mark, is did you enjoy Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
I didn't enjoy it, Mark. I loved it. I'm channeling my inner Simon Cowell. I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. I think I went into that one because the word coming out of Cannes was less than stellar, but there always seemed to be kind of an angle to the negative reviews, but really wanted to like this being Harrison's last ride as Indy. And fortunate enough to have seen it 3 times now and enjoyed it more every time I saw it, which I think is the mark of a good film on any measure. And yes, there are things about it that could be better, that probably could have done with a bit more time. Few effects here, a few tweaks there, but on the whole, it stacks up very well with the other 4 movies, so I was really pleased with it.
What I really liked about this film, beyond everything, was that it felt like it fitted so well from a pacing and just a tone perspective to all the other films. Especially the first 3, if I'm honest. So I felt like it wasn't some big nostalgia trip, like we were just basically being hit over the head repeatedly with nods to the other films in the series, but I felt like this was a genuine story that could stand on its own, and I think you could walk into that film not having seen any of the other Indiana Jones films and kind of get exactly who the character was, exactly what he was about, and hopefully at that point, obviously, when you go back and you watch the other 4. So I really enjoyed it. On one level, you know, how much stock do we ever put into critics' reviews? Just because that's what they're meant to be. They're meant to be critical, and you could say reaction chat's meant to be like that, but actually it's not. It's really just to kind of give us a chance to talk about what we thought was good and bad without necessarily kind of feeling like we have to break down every single kind of like reason and therefore and why behind everything. So let's start at the beginning. The first opening, 20 minutes or so, I'd say, which felt like quite a long period of time for the film, is set in 1944. So it's set at the tail end of World War II, and we're seeing Indiana Jones at his heyday. How amazing was that?
It was awesome. It was awesome because, one, visually, it's 95% there. It's now, in terms of getting it really bang on, it's now just finessing and tweaks. And no doubt there are a few moments where the eyes don't quite have the sparkle that they probably should, and just a couple of tiny moments where it didn't quite work, but that's Hollywood, you know. For the rest of it was phenomenal, so I bought into that completely. One observation was that they didn't de-age his voice. Harrison actually said himself, I just tried to lift my voice a bit of a register, but you are talking about an 80-year-old guy trying to do the voice of a 40-year-old guy. I'm damn sure my voice will sound different when I'm 80 as opposed to 50. It certainly sounds different to how it did even 10 years ago. So that's just a natural aging process thing. I think they could have probably done something with that. I don't know what re-speech would have done, but it kind of feels like they could have done something there. But that didn't detract. My headcanon is he had a cold. He just had a bit of a cold and a bit of a more rough voice than normal. So I was fine with that. The actual action, visually, it was fantastic. I love the concept of the loot train. I love that. The first 3 indie films opened, like Bond films opened, with the end of The Last Adventure. And generally that adventure doesn't have an awful lot to do with the main adventure. It didn't in Raiders. That Search for the Idol didn't really have anything to do with the rest of the film. Temple of Doom and the Hatchie didn't have much to do with the rest of the film. It was an instigator to lead you into the rest of it, but it wasn't actually pivotal. Crystal Skull, at the start of Crystal Skull, they're looking for the Crystal Skull. So that ties in. And Crystal Skull, when that came out, felt like a bonus film that we never thought we'd get. This, another 15 years on from Crystal Skull, feels like even more of a bonus. And the opening of this film totally ties in with the whole rest of the film. Not only is he going after the spear that sort of drew the blood of Christ, as they explain, which turns out to be a fake, but the Antikythera comes into it at the beginning, and that is driving not only Indy but Basil, which in turn drives Helena. So it's very much tied into the rest of the plot of the film. I really like that visually, musically. I mean, wow, John Williams is clearly having a ball with this film. Just all in. I think originally Mangold said he was going to do some themes for it and ended up writing over 2 hours of music. What a joy for us, Star Wars, Lucasfilm, indie fans, whatever, at this stage of our lives, let alone John Williams, who's 91, to still be getting a brand new John Williams score. Just a treat. I love the opening. I thought it was brilliantly done. What about you?
It was bittersweet because I did kind of think, oh my God, why could we not have had more Indiana Jones in the prime of his life fighting Nazis adventures? I mean, it was just so enjoyable. Adolf Hitler had this fascination with building weapons and making bigger and better weapons and stuff, but also this kind of like arcane idea of leveraging historical artifacts and reaching back into history to find things that potentially could help him win the war and really change the tide of a war. Really fascinating. It's just really nice how they spun off this, like you said, they're there for the spear, but then obviously they find part of the dial, and that leads us off, and it's great that actually all most of the characters, barring really Helena, that were really introduced into that opening scene are our main characters all the way through, both the antagonist and protagonist. Great that they de-aged Mads Mikkelsen, and I think they probably de-aged Toby Stevenson a little bit as well, because he looked a little bit older later on. There's some classic indie things where, like, the fact that he's just about to get hung and get his neck broken, and then like a bomb, that kind of like Deus Ex Machina way of kind of like saving the day and getting him out of scrapes has always been something that I've quite enjoyed. But they're completely implausible, but yeah, they're done and executed in a way that you kind of go, okay, yeah, I'll buy it. It's a stretch, but like I said, the whole train sequence just for me just was awesome, and just like how they managed to get him in and up on the train. And for me, obviously, the echoes of the conversations that Lucas had with Spielberg, saying how they wanted to kind of do like a James Bond type thing, and there's all these kind of echoes of like James Bond on the train in Octopussy and Skyfall, and the Tut-Tut race in Octopussy, and again the Tut-Tut chase, I should say, they have going through the streets later on, and so like for me, just sit there, it wasn't like a case of, well, Bond did that better or they nicked out on James Bond, but it's more of a case of like you can really see how they've kind of dialed in that kind of super adventure kind of aspect that I think really embodies Indiana Jones more so than I think any other film series.
I wonder, watching this, that obviously Mangold wasn't aping Spielberg. I mean, Mangold's not doing a Spielberg impression like JJ was doing a Spielberg impression for Super 8. It's not that kind of mimic, if that's any sense, but definitely going for the spirit of that. Mangold did Ford versus Ferrari, and so he directs motor vehicles really, really well. He gets that kinetic feel on the train. Excellent. It was fantastic. He really nails it with the tuk-tuk chase. And it just made me smile because George was always the petrol head. He was always the guy that was into speed.
Yeah.
You think back to all the stuff he did in Star Wars with the speeder bikes and all the pod race, and it's just speed, speed, speed. Loves the rev of the engine. And that tuk-tuk chase has got that. Going back to the 1944 sequence, though, to see Indy, like you say, in his pomp, just done so well, and then coming out of the back of that, him and Basil leap off the train. They take out the German officer that's trying to get them. And I think in the trailer, you do see the German officer come out of the mist. And I know a lot of people, me included, wondered whether or not that was present-day Indy seeing an earlier version of Indy, because there was all that talk of, the time travel aspect was fairly well known. People wondered how it was going to work. Is Indy going to meet himself? Is he going to get lost in the past or whatever? We'll get to that. But I thought that opening sequence was brilliant.
Hi, this is Andy Seacombe, otherwise known as Watto, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
We step from 1944, though, and come right up to the inverted commas present of 1969. Man's just landed on the moon. What did you make of those 60 scenes? Grouchy old Victor Meldrew, Indiana Jones. I thought it was brilliant.
And that's kind of where I thought to myself, how much of that is Harrison, and how much of that is him acting as Indiana Jones? Because Harrison does it seems to kind of portray the curmudgeon every now and again in real life. Yeah. He kind of hams it up on some of these American talk shows and stuff, which I think is very funny. It kind of felt as jarring and slightly out of place as I think it's meant to. It really did feel like, this is a man who is now out of his time depth. If you can imagine if actually he did jump 60 years into the future into 2029 or something like that establishing shot around a flat, it just told so much.
Yes.
Which then didn't necessarily need to be dwelled on too much for the rest of the film. And I know they do bring it up a couple of different times, but we see the fact that his son's dead and that clearly Marion's not present in his life and stuff. It's for those who know, for those who've seen 4, then obviously we get it. He is very solitary, and it does almost feel like he's never likely to get that happy ending. And we kind of saw at the end of Crystal Skull him walking down the steps, having just been married and out with his son and that. And so you think, that's a happy ending that he's going to get. But then obviously we find out the next chapter, things aren't that good again. So I thought that was really, really well done.
Yeah.
And then, going to his college or his university, and that kind of echo back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, where all the kids and Raiders are kind of, especially the girls are there, kind of fawning over him, writing "I love you" and mascara on their eyelids. And that kids of the late 1960s, early 70s, just not interested in the classics. This is just they're just sat there, bored out of their brains, listen to this old guy talking about a civilization that's died hundreds of years ago. And yet, the most important thing is the fact that these guys wheel a TV into the classroom so they can watch, the moon landing and the astronauts returning to Earth and all that. Very concise storytelling to really kind of say this character now is not actually fitting into his world in the way that he once did.
That's really well said. Exactly that. He's a man out of time without being out of time.
Yeah.
And he's become the antique that he chased almost, hasn't he? The relationship with Marion has come and gone. Mutt, as we later find out, he explains it himself to Helena. Mutt has kind of come and gone out of his life. In the last film, we know we'd lost Marcus. He'd lost his father. He's lost the college that he taught at for whatever reason, whether he moved on out of choice or whether it was him and Marion married and they decided to move to New York. We don't really know the details of that. All the staples had gone. And it felt to me as well that when Helena turns up in his class and she's answering all the questions about Archimedes and explains about the Antikythera, and Indy gets all energized because somebody gives a crap, and all of a sudden you see the old Indy, the teacher, the enthusiastic Indy that he kind of saw in Raiders when he's explaining to the government men with Marcus when they talk about the Ark. He's all excited because he wants to tell somebody, but this knowledge he's got, he's bursting to tell it. And when he's sitting in the bar and, who cares about going to the moon? There's nothing there. It's like Reno, or as he says, it's like Reno, but with no blackjack. Yeah. You feel for him terribly. And I just wondered whether or not that what you saw in Crystal Skull, the adventure he had there, that incredible, the things that he saw there, the things he can't explain, which he alludes to in Dial of Destiny. I wonder whether or not that was his last adventure. That was the last time he went out as Indiana Jones, that he does settle down with Marion and try to live a normal life until Mutt obviously enlists in presumably Vietnam and loses his life there. So this is what Helena says. One last hurrah for Indiana Jones. That really stood up to me.
An overall general kind of slight criticism I've had, having only seen the film once, and probably something that on multiple viewings it becomes clearer. It didn't necessarily feel like, with Raiders of the Lost Ark, you've got the Ark, and they explain what the Ark is very clearly at the beginning, and it's simple all the way through. But this felt like a little bit more complicated to kind of explain, and they didn't really know what it was that they were dealing with. It all felt a little bit theoretical, and with Mads Mikkelsen's character, where it's kind of whose side is he on? I'm guessing he was brought over in Operation Paperclip, which is when basically the Americans kind of grabbed a load of rocket scientists and brought them over to help them basically win the space race, really. And the same with his kind of his hench guys. It's were they government officials? Were they not? And you had the black girl who clearly I think was a CIA or some kind of like government representative. It kind of made it a little bit, not very clear, a little bit kind of more shades of grey. Indiana Jones is very contrasting, isn't it? It's like, oh, it's Indy versus the Germans, Indy versus the natives or what have you. This just felt a little bit more kind of like harder to kind of like discern on the first viewing anyway, who was a good guy, who was a bad guy. And that was the same with Helena as well.
Yeah, I think Helena felt like a Temple of Doom era Fortune and Glory kid, Fortune and Glory type character. And also a little bit like Mac in Crystal Skull. And ironic that she's English as well. That obviously the connection to Indy, she's his goddaughter. You see that great flashback scene when they go to Oxford and you see Basil about to smash the Antikythera. It's driven him mad. And there are lots of parallels, I think, between Indy and Helena, because they're a similar age to how Indy would have been at Temple of Doom era. Temple of Doom set in 35, so Indy would have been about 36 because he was born in 1899. Helena, work it out, he hasn't seen her for 18 years. He was 12 the last time we saw her, so Helena's 30. So, they're similar age, ballpark. Both got a young sidekick. In Temple of Doom, Indy had Short Round. In Dial of Destiny, Helena's got Teddy. So there's connections. Both were pickpockets. Great chance to mention Short Round there. They didn't pick up on it and didn't do it, but, hey-ho. So there are definitely parallels. Indy was going to keep those stones. When he saw the power of what it did, it belongs in a museum. What am I going to do with it anyway, sort of thing. So that's kind of like a turning point for Indy. And it felt like what they see at the end in Sicily is kind of a moment for Helena, that she's a different person at the end of the film that she was at the beginning. And also that both had fathers that were on quests. Basil was on a quest to figure out the Antikythera, to figure out what the Archimedes dial was all about. And he couldn't. And he figured out a lot, but he couldn't quite crack it. And it drove him mad. Henry, Sean Connery's character in Last Crusade, Indy's dad didn't go mad, but he was obsessed with it, and that's what fractured his relationship with Indy. So, there's lots of parallels. I think it's quite subtle in places, but I can see the links between the two, which is why I think Indy and Helena work so well together, because they lean into the facts, and it's this totally Harrison Ford's decision. Harrison still wanted to be punching out Nazis like a 50-year-old and swinging around and jumping about like he did. Even in Crystal Skull, he was still doing that. I don't think the producers, the directors would have said, oh, no, Harrison, you can't do that. You're nearly 80 years old. They'd have gone, yeah, okay, we can figure that out, and they'd have made it work. Harrison's the one that wanted to show him as an older man, so that opening scene with him pulling the t-shirt on and banging the kid next door's door with a baseball bat, like the grumpy old neighbour, I forget the character's name in Friends, that was always banging on the ceiling with his broom, but it was that kind of thing. It was totally, he's just a grouchy old man. And then as the film goes on, obviously you realise, well, he's lost his son. He's got every reason to be bitter. He's lost his wife because of that. Even more reason, he's just been retired off. I don't think he particularly wanted to retire. That wasn't my feeling.
I got that impression as well. It's like, it's a pretty forced retirement, I suppose you'd say. To be honest, I kind of thought to myself, I wonder if that's what they did for George when he sold Lucasfilm. Did they give him a clock?
Yeah.
I really liked Helena as a character. Admittedly, being way more honest than I need to, I think she's by far got the nicer pair of legs between her and Harrison Ford. I like the fact that, it was very difficult to kind of gauge where she was on what line she's kind of sat on, really, until the end.
In Tangiers, she's insufferable. When they go to the auction, skipping around, you just want to... I know she's got that great punch at the end, which kind of is a big moment. But there's bits in that scene when she's really getting under Indy's skin, like really being smug and she's sharp-witted like Phoebe is. And you just want to slap her because she's really pushing your buttons. I love that, though, but the more I see that, the more I'm like, she's disarmed by Indy even being there. Mm-hmm. He was her godfather, so it meant something when she was a kid. And then it's Indy that disappeared for 18 years. A 12-year-old kid doesn't disappear from a 60-something-year-old guy's life. It's the other way around. Indy abandoned her, so, and that's kind of, you look back at relationships, just because it's not mentioned in the films or mentioned anywhere else, we don't know if Indy kept in touch with Short Round, for example. Did Indy get Willie back to Delhi to get her way home and never see her again? We don't know that. So just because we don't see it or know it, inverted commas, doesn't mean it didn't happen. It could just as easily come into the storyline at some point. So it's a presumption to assume that that's the case. But it's definitely the truth that after he leaves with the Antikythera from Oxford, they never see each other again. So she's got every reason to be bitter. And if her defence mechanism is being snarky and sarcastic, like Indy's defence mechanism is to turn into a natural ageing as well, but to be a grouchy old man pouring whiskey in his coffee and banging on the neighbour's door with a baseball bat, it's an arc, isn't it? And not the Lost Ark, it's a character arc.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
I was hoping that we would see Short Round. Bear in mind that he's kind of made, the actor himself has kind of made a bit more of a like Renaissance period, having done was it Everything Everywhere All at Once. I was expecting to see him at some point, even if it was just right near the end. But the fact is that, I mean, we got Salah back, so we got John Rhys-Davies back, and I thought that was cool because there were some really fun moments.
You know, in Crystal Skull, there's that scene where Indy's being interrogated by the CIA. And then that 4-star general, the dude from Neighbours, Paul Robinson's dad, walks in and goes, "Don't you know who this is? Don't you know what this guy did for us in the war?" And then at the start of Dial of Destiny, you see him doing something in the war. Okay, it's archaeology. He's trying to rescue this spear, and then kind of stumbles across the Antikythera, and it becomes something else. But nevertheless, you kind of feel like these things are all connected, that he's not just doing it for archaeology or for a university, because Basil's there from Oxford, don't forget. So there's other things going on, and it just felt like it all fit in with some of that missing history of Indy that we never got to see.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, you kind of feel like the American government would be like, right, okay, if Adolf Hitler is going after these artifacts because they may or may not be able to help him win the war, be it just psychologically or actually physically, we need somebody to stop that. And so you can imagine, like, every time they get a bit of intelligence, Adolf's got some crazy idea that he's going to go and find something else, then they're going to go and knock on Indy's door and say, "Can you go and find it before the Nazis do?"
He's still the expert, isn't he? He's still the guy. You see that in that college scene where he's explaining stuff to the kids with the overhead projector. It was kind of fun to see as well.
I mean, I'd read a little bit of criticism about the whole kind of like use of the Nazis in this kind of film, and the fact they weren't really. I think somebody who's clearly spent more time studying films and writing about films and watching films or making films, kind of like, I was like, well, they didn't really kind of give the Nazi point of view, but it's like, but you don't need to. And I actually felt like, again, it's that kind of curmudgeonness, like you said, with the character out of time, that like he immediately thinks it's the Nazis.
Yeah.
And it's like, there hasn't been a Nazi really since like 1946, 47, shall we say.
Yeah.
And yet 20 plus years time, that's immediately where your mind goes to. It would be a bit like, if Bond always immediately jumped to the thought that, it's going to be the Russians or it's going to be the KGB, even though the USSR has disbanded and, everything has moved on for 20 years.
Yeah.
So the ending, and I will preface this by saying, if people haven't seen this one, why the hell are you still listening to us? But we do kind of go further than I think we've ever gone with Indiana Jones, and we've seen some crazy stuff. So we've seen spirits and ghouls fly out of an Ark of the Covenant. We've seen ghosts from the Templar Knights come and converse with and then save Indy's dad, and of course we've seen aliens in the Crystal Skull, but they've always been rooted in the present day Indiana Jones story. This is the first time that we've ever seen anything whereby Indiana Jones ends up going back in time. How did that sit with you? What was your thoughts when that actually happened and how it all kind of transpired?
And when I was watching it, it sat really well with me, because when I was watching it, all I could think about was Belloc's speech about the cheap wristwatch, bury it in the sand for 1,000 years. It's worth nothing now, bury it in the sand for 1,000 years, it's priceless kind of speech. Yeah. And the fact that Indy in 1969, quite apart from his life clearly not going the way we as fans of Indy or the character himself would want it to go, he's had loss, he's had sadness, and he's getting older and he ain't that keen on that. He's a relic in his own time. And so for him to go back to the past, to live and watch and see, and it was beautifully renditioned. I just love the visuals for how they did that. Just the shot. I don't know if you noticed, but when you see earlier in the film when they go to the temple with all the traps, they put the water displacement and all that stuff, and they finally get into the tomb and find the other half of the dial. That outside there's a guy doing like a Punch and Judy play, and you see the dragon, and the dragon is the plane. I thought that was a really cool touch that they worked in, because when she's looking at the sides, because dragons don't have propellers, and she's a bit confused by all of that, and you start to realise how it's all starting to come together towards the end, which again I thought was really well done. That Indy, to go back to the past, to be there and see it, I really thought, especially as he'd been shot as well, I thought, wow, is he going to stay? I mean, would it change things if he would? I mean, of course it would change things if he stayed in Helena's the smart one.
Yeah.
I know in 1969, Back to the Future is still 16 years away. Which don't seem that long when you think about it, but 16 years in the future of this is when... It's only 8 years until Star Wars comes out, let's put it that way, that, you know, she knows he can't stay. You'll muck it all up. You know, you can't be here. He clearly speaks Archimedes' language. I'm guessing it's Latin. But, you know,
yes.
he can't be there. So that made all the sense. I thought it was really well done. I like the concept of it. I love the fact that the continental drift moment when he's like, you know, Archimedes was a genius, but he hadn't observed this. How could he know? You know, Indy's got knowledge. It's all about knowledge. That's what they say at the end of Crystal Skull. When they're talking about the interdimensional beings, or that, you know, their treasure wasn't physical. Their treasure was knowledge. Indy has got the knowledge. Indy figures out all the things that make that time journey that Voller's trying to do ain't going to happen. And again, it's Helena that says, this is a one-way trip. This is a time tunnel. It goes forward, it goes back. It doesn't go anywhere else. It's just between these 2 points of history. And she's the one that's like, can't leave the dial here. He's got to figure it out for himself. She's the one that's aware of the potential fracturing of time and history. Indy is lost in the moment. He's emotional. He's dying as well. He's been shot. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's all these other elements. I thought it was brilliantly done. And I love the fact that she's the one that decks him at the end. Like a Marion punch. You know, she proper puts him down. He's an old guy, you know. She puts him down, gets him on the plane. Teddy gets them out of there, you know. Great little hero moment for Teddy. I like Teddy. Some people are bashing on Teddy. I thought he was fine. I liked him as a character. So I really enjoyed it.
And also it's that kind of payoff, isn't it? We see Teddy, very first thing, it's like, oh, he's learning to fly. And I was like, so this is Chekhov's flying lesson. You kind of saw where that was coming. It was really nice how they kind of did.
And the other pilot being there as well, which I thought was a good touch.
Exactly, and the fact that the other pilot kind of actually helps him, and it kind of shows that, you know, not every German's necessarily a Nazi.
Yes.
You know, which I suppose is probably quite an important point the producers needed to probably get over at some point. I thought he wasn't going to die. How many times has he been shot and he hasn't died? But I really was like, he is going to stay there, isn't he? I could literally, whilst I was watching the film, I could literally see the shot of him standing on a cliff and seeing the plane pull away into the time rift. So the fact that she just turns around and decks him, I thought was hilarious. And it's quite nice because like they don't feel like they need to spend any time talking about the, you know, time travel consequences. I mean, at this point in time, no pun intended, most audiences have seen some time travel film. Back to the Future, even like, you know, Avengers and stuff like that.
Or Terminator,
Terminator, exactly. So, you know, most people have got some rough idea of like, you know, the Hollywood kind of like laws of like causality and stuff like that. So therefore, you know, they didn't need to kind of like spell that out too much. And I think it kind of like worked really well how it was done. He's buried with a watch and then, but, you know, we see the watch and all that kind of stuff. So it felt like a nice ending. It didn't necessarily feel too perilous. They kept on saying, oh, you know, we're running out of time with things closing, but they kind of put that to one side to allow Indiana Jones to have this moment with this amazing character of history. And I thought that was more important than like, you know, everything else imploding around him and stuff like that. So I quite liked that, and I felt it was quite brave, whereas they could have kind of made it a real kind of like flight to the death to get through and all that, and actually you don't even need to see it. The punch and the blackout is enough and can work out what's happened since then, how we get back and that. So
when he gets back and he wakes up, and it's very much a similar sort of camera pan to the opening 1969 scene, but he's in bed and Helena walks in the room and then Marion comes in with Teddy. I mean, that for me, actually, weirdly, the first two times I saw it, I just smiled. The third time I saw it, it actually got to me a little bit because as a fan, as a viewer, as somebody who's watched these films since the early 80s, this is the last one, and it's definitely the last one with Harrison. He said that.
Yeah.
You know, and the only avenue, a possible avenue I could see for any more appearances as Indy would be if they did something like a Helena spin-off, which I don't think they will, or a short-round spin-off, which is probably more likely. And Indy turns up like the old guy telling stories at the bottom of his steps in the Young Indiana Jones bookends for the TV show. So there's potential there. A bit like Rocky turning up in Creed kind of thing. But I don't think Harrison would want to do that. You couldn't really ask for a better send-off because even he said it, even Harrison said it. Why did you want to do a fifth one? Well, I was interested in seeing seeing the character at an older age and I wanted to investigate that. And then in another interview he says, because I wanted to know what happened next. You see him get married with Marion and Mutt and he's like, I want to know what happens next. When you've got an actor like Harrison Ford saying, well, I want to know what happened next, And then you get a film like Dial of Destiny, which ends beautifully with Indy and Marion kind of retracing that scene from Raiders in a sweet way, which kind of obviously became their thing. Every couple's got a thing, haven't they? Little sayings you've got between each other that means nothing to nobody else. Well, that's their thing. So that was cool. And even down to the final shot, Salah, I love the fact that Salah, I wish he was in it more. I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah.
I far preferred Salah in Dial of Destiny to Salah in Last Crusade, because in Last Crusade, they did Salah and Marcus dirty. They turned Marcus into a bit of an idiot. Marcus, the guy that's run this eminent college, supposed to be an expert, and they made him look like a fool. And Salah was just a bit of like a big not bumbling, just a bit of a caricature of the version you saw in Raiders. This felt like the guy you saw in Raiders, but 40 years later. I love the fact that Indy got him and his family out. And then he's a damn taxi driver in New York. I just thought that was perfect for Salah. So to have Salah there at the end, to have Indy lose Mutt and be able to get Marion back. Indy, are you back? That's what got to me hearing her say that, are you back? He's lost a son, of course, and they obviously spent a good few years together before he decided to enlist, just to piss him off, as he says, which is probably where the guilt comes from. But he's gained Helena now. She's clearly in his life now. She's not a replacement for Mutt. You can't replace a son, but she's in his life. So Indy ends the film with the family. So I thought it was a brilliant send-off.
Would you have liked to have seen more of Marion in the film?
Yes and no. I think in the action flow of the film, it felt like it needed to be Indy and Helena. That tuk-tuk chase with Marion would have been fun, but don't forget we had all that great action stuff in Crystal Skull. Indy's chasing the Ark. Indy's chasing the Shankara Stones. He's helping his father chase for the Holy Grail. He's after the Crystal Skull. In Dial of Destiny, ultimately, Indy's after Marion. That's his goal. It's not just about the knowledge. It's not just about this. I think when he's back in the past, he's shot and he thinks he's going to die, and he doesn't think he's ever going to get Marion back. He's like, that's done. That speech when he's on Ronaldo's boat, when he speaks to Helena, what would you do if you go back in time? Would you kiss Cleopatra, that sort of thing? No, I'd tell my son not to go to war because he's going to die and the grief would overwhelm his mother and it would end our marriage. That is such a sorrowful scene. That's the hardest scene in the whole film to watch because you feel it for Indy. And I think Helena starts to understand more about what her godfather's about. I think that the grail, if you like, for Indy in Dial of Destiny isn't the Antikythera. It's none of that. It's about Marion. So to get to the end, he's almost speechless, isn't he, at the end? When he moves the magnet off a picture. Because he's a bit pissed off, isn't he? When he sees the divorce papers. It's all gone wrong. He's tried to fix it. He can't fix it. It's like Han and Leia splitting up in before Force Awakens when Kylo's gone bad and Han can't fix it because he doesn't know how, and so it ends their marriage. It's ruined them, and it's a little bit like that, really, if you think about it, except Indy gets a second chance at fixing it, and I just love the fact that they made it work.
I guess it's because when they wrote Crystal Skull, they assumed that would be the end, so therefore bringing back Marion into that film and for the relationship to kind of develop and for her to spend so much on-screen time then, that makes sense. But obviously now, like you said, it's kind of like it's a different story and it's the thing that he wants that is just out of reach that he can't get back. One more thing I just want to say, I think the score by John Williams for this film is probably some of his best work, and I think controversially probably better than anything that he did in the sequel trilogy. I don't know if it's because like he's been able to really reprise a role, and kind of get back into this kind of Indiana Jones kind of vibe. I like the fact that the Indiana Jones theme wasn't overused.
Yes.
Which sometimes can be like a crux that some films kind of like rely on too much.
Yeah.
And it's kind of made me go back and actually kind of make a John Williams Indiana Jones playlist on Spotify and been kind of just been putting that on repeat. So let's be honest, if that's John Williams' last film, I think what a film to go out on.
It wouldn't surprise me one iota if this was nominated for an Oscar, which I'm pretty sure it will be. Yeah. Wouldn't surprise me one jot if this was the indie film that won it. Because, it, like you say, I love the Crystal Skull soundtrack, but it's not a memorable soundtrack like this. This has got loads of stuff. That Helena's theme is gorgeous. The music in Tangiers is fantastic.
Sad as well.
Really sad and just beautifully done. And it's up there with Marion's music. And you do hear little motifs. John's all about the motifs. Just hear bits all the way through. Some of the action stuff in the tuk-tuk chase. You hear some of the chase music from Last Crusade. There's just little bits just dotted in just to remind you of, this is what Indy's like when he's going after the Nazis. It's got that kind of feel about it. So one of the most pleasing aspects, apart from the fact that Ford's clearly having a ball. Everybody fit great into the movie. Nobody didn't feel like they should have been there. That you can tell an Indiana Jones story in the 60s, the late 60s. I mean, this is, right at the end of the 60s, July 1969, when we're on the moon. We're into that sphere of his life, and it still feels like an indie film. As soon as he gets back out to North Africa, back to Algeria, back to Tangiers, all these places, it's classic indie. So I was just thrilled to bits. And as I say, I've seen it 3 times. I have every intention of seeing it again at least once on the big screen, because goodness knows, 2023, it's going to be on Disney Plus by Christmas. So definitely this is one to see on the big screen. Oh,
I completely saw it at IMAX the other day. It's loud. It's obnoxiously loud sometimes in the IMAX. But God, that's how you need to see Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford play Indiana Jones. Probably for the last time. However, something that isn't going to be for last time is me and Mr. Newbold. We will be back, probably with another reaction chat sometime soon. If it's not before Ahsoka, it will definitely be with Ahsoka. And of course, you can catch up with us every week on Making Tracks.
Thanks for listening to Making Tracks. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app for the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday night at 7 p.m. UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Thank you very much for listening, and everybody else. I don't know. I don't really have a sign off for Indiana Jones.
What could you say? Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
There you go. Fortune and glory, kid. Fortune and glory.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's Planet Leia.